Hi everyone, it's Danny. Welcome to another Casual Sundays discussion. First of all, sorry I didn't post anything yesterday, but the workers worked all day. It was so noisy. I'm sorry. Anyway, hopefully that will not happen too often. Alrighty, so today we're going to discuss about humidity in relation with orchids. And this is because one of my viewers suggested that I make a video on this topic. I don't usually talk about humidity too much. You'll see why. But before we go into the subject, I would just like to give a shout out and a big thank you to our supporter this week, Clayton, on orchidnature.com. Thank you so much. You are so generous. We really appreciate it. And hopefully you'll enjoy my videos in the future as well. Okay, now humidity. Well, everybody says that orchids need humidity to do well, but they don't really tell you how much humidity you should have. In a normal home, humidity might be an issue sometimes because you might use radiators, ACs, and so on. So I'll discuss a little bit about humidity, tell you my 2 cents actually. I decided to not struggle with humidity anymore, and I'll tell you my reasons. But first of all, let me just say that higher humidity indeed helps any type of orchid, but the degree of help is more or less visible depending on the hybrid, on the species, and so on. Now, relative humidity is important for orchids because they lose water through their leaves in the process of exchanging gas. Anyway, the bottom line is that if humidity is too low, some orchids might get dehydrated, might look pretty bad, and I'll show you some examples. But the funny thing is, not all orchids react the same. And we have here 2 major groups of orchids that I absolutely love, which are particularly not fussy about humidity. And these are the species which don't encounter high humidity in their natural habitat, and the beautiful complex hybrids that people created to withstand low humidity and life in a home. So I'll focus more today on those types of orchids which are well suited for lower humidity and the ones that are not so well suited for low humidity, or some reassurance that you absolutely don't need to hassle with humidity. Okay, let me just start by saying that if your relative humidity is over 40% in your growing space, you should be just fine with most orchids available for purchase. Now, the number one orchid which absolutely cannot be bothered with humidity is the Phalaenopsis orchid, and I've discovered that both the complex hybrids you can easily find in stores and the species cannot really be bothered with humidity. I mean, not visibly, very visibly anyway. As I was saying, the higher the humidity, the better the orchid will perform. But in this case, it's not that visible. And particularly, the complex hybrids that you find in the stores are really not those types of orchids to make you go overboard with humidity. Now, if you live in a climate which is very dry, you might actually need to provide a little bit more humidity with some humidity trays or with ultrasonic humidifiers. But if you live in a normal temperate, let's say, climate that has over 30% humidity, I really don't see the point of hassling with providing more humidity for Phalaenopsis orchids, particularly the complex hybrids. These complex hybrids were purposely created to withstand low humidity, and practically I had my Phalaenopsis orchids in a higher humidity environment, and then I just stopped hassling with it, and I saw absolutely no difference in performance. So really, if you have an environment with 30-40% humidity, I think you should be just fine with the complex hybrid Phalaenopsis orchids. Second types of orchids which absolutely cannot be bothered with humidity are the Cattleya orchids. Again, the complex hybrids are very well suited for home environments. They are more resilient. I'm not sure so much about the species because I don't have too many species. I do have one, and this is the, whoopsie, you'll have to take my word for it. It's the Leopoldi. She cannot be bothered with humidity. I didn't hassle at all to keep the environment humid, and really there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't seem to hassle, it doesn't seem to have stunted growth, the roots keep growing, everything is just fine. So I think Cattleya orchids again are well suited for lower humidity, and you shouldn't necessarily go overboard and hassle way too much with providing humidity if you absolutely cannot, or it's just such a big drag for you. They can pretty much withstand lower humidity. Let's say 40% is pretty much ideal for these types of orchids. Okay, third, Catasetum orchids. I absolutely do not hassle in providing any humidity with these guys. Don't confuse relative humidity with hydration and wet media. They love wet media. They really cannot be bothered by high humidity. These are hybrids I am not sure if this applies to all the species out there, but the hybrids, the Wine Delight and the Millennium Magic, cannot be bothered with humidity. I mean, if I would have provided more humidity, I don't think this guy would have grown more than this, really. And I don't think it would have created more flower spikes than this. It has one that is spent to 3 flower spikes. And I did not hassle. I kept him in the sun where humidity is indeed lower, so I think he received, I don't know, 20% humidity. No drama whatsoever. So I think this is one of those orchids which is absolutely not fussy. As long as it receives water, she should be just fine. Another one, believe it or not, Vanda orchids. They can really care less about relative humidity, but they do care about being hydrated. I do soak my Vandas, and I think I told you this a million times, spraying the root system lightly is pretty much not enough in my environment, which is not that humid. I get 30-40%, let's say in the summertime, although it can go lower than this in the daytime, and they really cannot be bothered with this. The humidity in the case of Vanda orchids helps when you don't have time to actually soak it and water it as you should. The higher the humidity, the less frequent you actually need to water it. But other than that, I don't think it gets very affected by the low humidity. Similarly to Cattleya orchids, the Epidendrum orchids and Cyclia orchids, most of them at least, they cannot be bothered with humidity as well, as long as they are hydrated. So again, these are some species that really don't require you to hassle too much with humidity if you have 30-40% humidity in your growing space. Now you might have discovered a trend here. I always say that if you don't have enough humidity, you should make sure that your orchid is hydrated. This is really important. The lower the humidity in your growing space, the more attention you need to pay to watering and maintaining your orchid hydrated. As I was saying, through the transpiration process, orchids dehydrate, so you need to maintain them hydrated. The lower the humidity in your environment, the more you need to water your orchids and to make sure they are properly hydrated. Because in a low humidity environment, the effects of dehydration and not watering in time are more severe, visibly more severe than in an environment that has more humidity. And that's the con. So with low humidity, even though some species really can perform really well, you do need to pay attention to some stuff because the balance is a lot finer, and any change, any misbehavings on your part will definitely be more visible and will happen much faster. Okay, let's move to some orchids which actually do visibly better in a more humid environment. And here we have Oncidium orchids. Now, they are not really fussy with humidity, but you can see an improvement, a visible improvement, if you have a more humid environment. So let's say 50-60% humidity can make an Oncidium orchid look spectacular. As you can see, my Oncidium is pretty fine. This is the Cherry Baby. I love this one. It smells so nice. It does pretty fine, but occasionally I do get some wrinkled leaves and so on. So I do get these things. I probably wouldn't get them if my humidity would be 50-60% all the time. So with Oncidiums, let's say most Oncidium hybrids, it's good to have a little bit more humidity. You can absolutely do without this high humidity if you maintain them properly hydrated. They do drink a lot of water, but from time to time you will get some things that suggest that, you know what, we could use a little bit more humidity. If you cannot provide it, it's fine, we'll manage. But if you can provide it, we'll look even better. So most Oncidiums do like a little bit more humidity than Phalaenopsis and Cattleya orchids. The same can be said for Miltonia orchids. My Miltonia is doing wonderfully, but I did not hassle with humidity. And there are some things that suggest that sometimes I didn't do a good job. So as you can see, I get the pleated leaves. This is a little bit of dehydration. I did my best to keep this orchid hydrated, and for the main part, it looks good. It bloomed, everything is okay, but I can tell that this can do with slightly a little bit more humidity, relative humidity, that I am already providing. Another one that shows me that it can do with a little bit more relative humidity is the Gongora orchid, and in this section I can include the Stanhopea as well. Now these guys will do okay in a lower humidity environment as well if you keep them hydrated, of course. But if you look at the leaves, you can just tell that it would like just a little bit more humidity. Not necessarily too much, but let's say 50-60% would have been a little bit better for this particular one. Again, you can see that it does pretty okay, But this suggests that this one does really like a little bit more humidity, so this might be worth hassling a little bit more for. So as you can see, there are those types of orchids which are not necessarily super fussy about humidity. They can do well in low humidity, but they can do even better, visibly better, if humidity was just a tiny little bit higher than what you already have. And the main orchids in this category are, of course, the Oncidium, the vast majority of the Oncidium hybrids, the Gongora, and Miltonias, of course. Not Miltoniopsis, Miltonia. Speaking about Miltoniopsis, let's now talk about the orchids which absolutely hate low humidity. First one on the list is the Miltoniopsis, which I do not possess any longer because I simply cannot hassle with it. But I have the next best thing, which is the Nelly Isler. It's a hybrid of a Miltoniopsis, and sadly it inherited a lot of the Miltoniopsis quirks, let's say. And as you can see, mine looks pretty damn sad. It can survive in what I provide, but really, honestly, it's not enough for this one, and probably next year I'll hassle a little bit more. I've kept this one in a high humidity environment at some point 2 years ago. I had the humidifier, then I gave it up because I didn't have space, and I can totally see a major difference. So when this type of orchid is kept in lower humidity, 40%, it's not enough. You can see here the pseudobulbs are smaller, they have wrinkled leaves. Also, I noticed in low humidity you get all sorts of spots on the leaves. It looks like the cells are collapsing. I don't even know how to call it. Miltoniopsis developed the very same thing. It's a disease. It's a thing with these types of orchids. So these guys really absolutely need over 60% humidity. Let's say somewhere around 70 to 80% humidity should be quite okay for these ones. And sadly, you cannot do this in a house without actually hassling with an ultrasonic humidifier. If you use a humidifier, you need fans, you need to have a separate room, because I don't think you like to live in 70% or 80% humidity, you know, and so on. You will get molds on the wall. So these hybrids really are fussy when it comes to humidity, and you can see the effects. Other orchids which are equally fussy about this are the Masdevallia orchids. Maybe there are some hybrids or species which can tolerate lower humidity, but you know, for the vast majority of them, go with high humidity. Also the Dracula orchids, and I'm sure there are other species, oh, the Phalaenopsis as well, and I'm sure there are some other species which cannot really adapt to our low humidity. So these ones, I would really not recommend them if you don't want to hassle with providing more humidity. One thing that I would actually like to point out here is that any good thing excessively will stop being good and start to become very bad. So excessive humidity can actually lead to a lot of issues if you don't balance it. So the higher the humidity you have, the more ventilation you need to provide to your orchids. This is why in many cases the whole sphagnum and bag method horribly goes wrong, and your orchids would get full of molds and fungi and all of that. Of course, the results will depend on environment. Always consider your environment, but just keep in mind that the higher the humidity levels are, the more ventilation you need to provide to avoid bacterial and fungal infections. Alrighty, so thank you for watching this video. Hope it helped you. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and a share. If you'd like to see more videos from me, simply subscribe to my channel. I post on a daily basis. Also, feel free to leave me questions or suggestions in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you. If you click on the left side of your screen, you'll be directed to orchinature.com, where you'll find care sheets, identification sheets, and also you can talk to us in the forum section. And on the right side of your screen, you can click to watch another orchid video. Thank you for joining. I'll see you next time. Bye!